Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast supplement. What episode is this? I always like looking on the fly here. This is episode 90. Wow. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined today by someone I've actually wanted to sit down and talk with for a long time. Someone who actually torpedoed me when I was at IGN a little bit. Erik Kain. Erik, thank you for being here. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm glad we got that right out of the way, that the IGN thing.
Yeah, well, that's how I became familiar with you. Actually, so you wrote a piece about on Forbes about my opinions on Mass Effect 3 at IGN. I've talked a lot about those opinions since. I don't think that they were eloquently delivered at all. But that's how I became familiar with Erik, was because we had kind of a salvo going back and forth. I'll also tell you, Erik, this is a little known fact. I mean, no one knows this but me, is that you use the word pernicious in your article name, the pernicious myth of gamer entitlement, I think it was called.
Yeah.
And I that introduced that word into my vocabulary. And I still use it today. So
it's a good word.
It is a good word. So I had to look when I was like, what is, I had to like, someone called me pernicious. I had to go look it up. So Erik, I've really been, ever since then, we've softened a great deal, and you and I go back and forth on Twitter over the last years. And I've wanted to have you on because I think you're an interesting cat. You're kind of an outsider like I am. And I think we come down on some different sides of opinions, which our audience likes, and they like conducting valuable and different and disparate conversations, which is why you're here today. But I don't know what you're going to say about any of the topics I want to throw at you. But before we kind of do any of this, for those that are unfamiliar with you, who are you, Erik Kain, and where do you come from?
Well, I've been writing about video games for about 8 or 9 years at Forbes. I come from Montana, but now I live in Arizona. So I'm just all over the West Coast. I've lived in Vancouver, British Columbia, Seattle, Washington, Denver, Colorado. But now I live in Flagstaff, Arizona, and it's a college town up in the mountains. I've been writing about video games, TV shows, all that. Recently started a Substack. I've been lately jumping back into the whole fray with covering the sort of problems with media, with journalism, not just game journalism, but journalism sort of broadly. Though there's plenty to cover in games journalism. Yeah, I don't know. I got a couple kids. I got a couple dogs. And
wow.
Yeah.
You live in a fulfilling life down there in Arizona. I love Arizona. Beautiful state.
It's a great state. Yeah.
I love Montana, too. My dad almost bought. I went to Montana for the first time in 1995 and I just totally fell in love with it. I went with my dad. He was looking for land. We also went to Alberta, which was kind of pretty, too.
Yeah. It's beautiful up there.
So I wanted to ask you about a few, because you were talking about we're talking about game culture, we're talking about games media, we're talking about video games, but I think the highest kind of thing I want to ask you right now, just to kind of understand your mind a little bit better, is what is attractive to you about video games? You write about them, you cover them, you're passionate about them like I am, but what is it that's attractive to you about them?
That's a good question. I mean, at sort of the fundamental level, I just really enjoy playing video games, right? Yeah. I've been playing video games since I was a kid. My parents, when I was very young, they told me I could never have a Nintendo. And then when I turned 10, which is the age of my son now, they bought me a Nintendo as a surprise. And they have a video of me opening it and then bursting into tears, crying with joy and surprise. I mean, it was kind of awesome. A dick move because they told me I could never have one. Then they got me one. So, since Super Mario Brothers and really before that, we played Pong and Lode Runner and all that. So I've just been playing games a long time. And when I got done with college, I was working crappy jobs and just sort of like accidentally found my way into writing about other things. Like I used to write about politics and the war on drugs and things like that. And then I decided that video games sounded like more fun and maybe less divisive. And so I started writing about video games. And then I realized that I was wrong. And they're just as divisive and crazy as any other subject.
Indeed.
But yeah, so I guess I've enjoyed just escaping into all these different crazy worlds. And I enjoy the competitiveness of it. Lately, mostly I play competitive games like Black Ops Cold War and just really enjoy it. Now, playing with friends. there's just so much about video games that I find appealing.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you that because I love hearing people's answers. I don't even know what my own answer would be. It's been so long since I started playing them. It's such a in part of my life since the late 80s that I don't know. I love video games. I think the biggest thing to me is I know a game is really speaking to me when I don't care about the trophies for a game. That's when I really know I'm having fun, when the meta game can be overwhelming. I wanted to ask you about something that I saw you kind of talking about a few things. I was actually reading your Substack. I love Substack. I think it's awesome.
That's great. Yeah.
I'm a huge supporter of Substack. It's for the uninitiated out there who are familiar, obviously, with Patreon. Substack is just like Patreon, but it's really for the written word. You can have that kind of stuff on Patreon too, but that's not really what thrives there. And so I follow quite a few political writers there, from Barry Weiss to Jesse Singal to you and others. And so I was going through some of your stuff, and there were a couple of games that were popping up that I wanted to talk to you about. We'll talk about 6 Days in Fallujah. I've covered that a great deal. I actually wanted to ask you about This Land Is My Land.
Yeah.
Now, for those that don't know, this is a game being made by a team of 4 or 5 people in Poland, and it's a kind of a revenge fantasy. Oh, I'm sorry. Where was it?
The Ukraine.
The Ukraine. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I know it's different.
It's okay.
Let's see if they get invaded by Russia in the next few weeks. So I love the idea of this game. It's basically a power fantasy and a revenge fantasy, as you play Indians kind of, I guess, fighting colonists. And it's been in early access actually for a while. And so people have been writing about it, and you could tell how cyclical and how lazy games media is, because this game has existed for so long and then someone brought it up and then everyone else started talking about it, which is exactly what happened to Troy Levitt over at Avalanche, when no one knew this guy was doing anything until one person, the ridiculously stupid Liam Robertson, brought him up. So what is your take on this game? Tell everyone a little bit about this game and what the controversy is about it, because since it's not a PlayStation game yet, I hope it does come to PlayStation. I doubt it will, but I hope it does. This is not something that necessarily we know about in our audience. So tell us a little bit about the game and what the controversy is about it.
So it's an independent game made by a small Ukrainian studio, and it is from the perspective of the Native American tribes during the sort of colonial expansion. And it's sort of a survival / revenge / basically it's take back our land from these people who are taking our land, right? And yeah, it's been, I think, since 2018 or 2019, it's been in early access on Steam. So it's been around. A lot of people have been playing it. Basically what happened is some sort of, all these people are just avatars and Discord tags. So we don't really know what their actual racial background is, but some native gamers in the community, or that just got into the community, basically asked if there were any native people on the team. And of course, since this is a Ukrainian team of 4 people, there were not any Native Americans on the team. So, there's literally one coder on this team, right? So, it's a passion project more than anything. And so because there weren't any, some of these people suggested that they hire these people themselves, and they turned them down and said, no, we love to get feedback from our community, but we can't afford to hire anybody else on our team. And so this sort of spilled over into a bunch of accusations of cultural appropriation and racism. And, inside this community, that's one thing, but pretty quickly it gets spread on Twitter and social media. And then you have people who really know nothing at all, just sort of blasting this idea that, oh no, they're racist, this is cultural appropriation, and trying to tear the game down, which to me seems really weird, because I don't know about you, but how many games have you played from an American indigenous perspective?
Yeah, no, I mean, I can think of none that tell a story of, like, because there's like Prey and all that shit, but I can't think of a story that's kind of, it's not positive. It's reversing the power fantasy. To me, that seems awesome. I mean, that seems awesome, no matter who made it.
Totally.
I think it sounds so fun.
Yeah. And it raises some questions, of course. I think the whole notion of cultural appropriation is 99% bullshit. I think there are occasions where I think it can be applied, but I think it's just one of those terms that's overused, like to the point of meaninglessness. But, what do you do if you're a small developer from the Ukraine and you want to make a game about, a foreign culture? I think asking the community for feedback is a pretty good step. I mean, you can research the history, you can research the culture, and then you can ask people, like, is this genuine? Does this seem, but I mean, the idea that they have to hire actual Native American developers all the way on the other side of the world seems, I mean, it would be one, if this was Ubisoft or Activision, totally. Yeah. You've got that sort of war chest. You should probably hire some people that know this culture. You're a tiny, like, I mean, it sort of feels like, once again, with this whole crowd of like activist, woke people, it's more important. It doesn't matter who the target is. It doesn't matter how big or how small. It just matters that there's a target. Right. And again, that's like Troy Levitt. He's just a guy. He's not a celebrity. He's just a guy working on a game. And yet we had, I mean, with that controversy, we had a couple dozen different hit pieces on this guy. Nobody bothered to really talk to him.
And by the way, all the hit pieces got his title wrong. I know. In all of those hit pieces as well.
You know what I did too, and I said that in one of my pieces. I just sort of, it's one of those mundane details like lead designer that you just don't even think to check. Right. But the fact that no one's checking any of the facts is pretty galling to me. So
yeah, I agree. And to me, with this land is my land, I guess I'm kind of wondering where the controversy stems, other than what you're saying, from kind of this manufactured, instantaneous, by the book outrage. Because why does a game like this have to have any texture or realism or story in it? Like, that's my whole thing. Is it's like, isn't this, to me, I would look at this game, Eric, and I'd be like, all right, the constantly offended by everything, disappointed in everything, everything's the same, it's all white men and whatever. Here's your power fantasy game made by some guys in the Ukraine, and here it is. And I just don't understand my whole thing with this, Eric, with this game and with others, in 6 Days in Fallujah is another example. I'm not really sure what they want. Right. Like, what is it that you want? Because you being a censor is not going to happen. So what is it that you want? And what do you think the answer is to that? Like, what is it that they ultimately want? Do they want to snuff this game out of existence? Do they want to hurt the developers? I'm confused about that, especially with people, when we talk about Fallujah, with Rami Ismail and others, millionaires, basically directing all of their attention at the studio to try to destroy them. It seems quite galling to me that you would try to snuff something out of existence. That's how I interpret it.
Well, the question is, I mean, I think it's a couple different questions. What do they want? What do they say they want versus what they actually want are probably two different things. So with 6 Days in Fallujah, there's quite a few people saying that this game will cause harm. And harm is one of those buzzwords that is used, again, completely out of any sort of connection with reality. Like, this game will not actually cause harm. Censorship actually does cause, I would say, literal harm. But a game about something that you find offensive, it doesn't cause harm. You don't have to play it, right? Unless you're going to really parrot the idea that video games cause real world violence, which has been debunked time and time again. So what they say they want is they want to prevent harm. They want to prevent racism. With This Land Is My Land, they want native voices to be heard. This is all things they say they want. What they think that what they really want is to cultivate outrage and get attention. And that attention and outrage is sort of like their fuel. And they want to rise to the top of this kind of sort of constantly effervescent outrage, bubbling cauldron of bullshit. They won't ever say that's what they want. But I mean, I think that is what they want. Because if you want native voices to be heard, then you should support a game like this that might drive demand for more Native American games. And then maybe some Native American developers could, get on Kickstarter and make their own game. And, I mean, I would be totally down with playing and supporting a game made by Native Americans,
Me too.
If it were good. I mean, but and the same thing with like 6 Days in Fallujah, like, you want Iraqi voices to be heard. Okay. Iraqi game developers, make some games, I mean, Rami Ismail is an Arabic game developer, and his voice has been heard. So, I just think that they say they want one thing, but they really just want, I mean, it's this whole, okay, so I've been trying to deconstruct this whole woke movement in my head, because unlike you, I am a lefty, right? I'm a commie bastard, right? But I think wokeness has nothing to do with anything liberal or progressive. Like, this whole woke movement that's sort of infected games journalism, infected the wider media climate, is really about sort of language policing. And that language policing is its fundamental and its core mission It's core directive. It's not about action. It's about language. And so this outrage, dogpiling people, trying to cancel things, it's all about sort of this wrong think or this wrong speak that they're trying to double down on. And the only useful, I mean, what does that actually achieve? What would it achieve to get the government to ban 6 Days in Fallujah or get Steam and Sony and Microsoft to deplatform it? What would that really achieve? I mean, virtually nothing. Nothing that would actually help social justice causes. Is that going to help structural racism or like, you know, I cannot really come to any sort of conclusion that their stated goals will actually achieve anything of value. And so it has to just be this attention. It's an attention grab.
It's so strange because I think that what you say, there's such a nugget of truth there, because you said it, you know, you're far to the left. I consider myself a moderate conservative. I'm actually interested in more left-wing views as time goes on, but it's these people that I can't tolerate. And so I can't really be in that group because I just would hate myself being associated in any way with some of these people. So, well,
they're authoritarians. So
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I mean, it's the horseshoe theory is so played out now, but it does come to pass that the Christian conservatives in the 80s that tried to ban D&D, Jack Thompson in the 90s, Tipper Gore, Joe Lieberman, all of those guys in the ESRB's creation and the outrage over Mortal Kombat and Night Trap and later on Grand Theft Auto. They are them. And I don't understand, Eric. I don't know if you have any insight into this. It seems almost like sociopathic to, now I'm not a psychologist, but it seems sociopathic to me to be like, we're not even far away enough from this for me. I was in the industry when Jack Thompson was doing what he was doing. It's not like I'm 36. It's not like I'm like this ancient man. I was in the industry covering it. And just a few years later, basically, they are them. And I keep saying to the audience, what distresses me, Eric, this time around, the Christian conservatives had no power even in the 80s. D&D thrived, right? Tipper Gore and all these people, they actually failed because the government stayed out of gaming and ESRB was created as a result. Jack Thompson got sued into oblivion and got debarred. You know, to me, I feel like, and this is the terminology I use, the killer's in the house this time, and this is unsettling to me. Rami Ismail to me is unsavory for one simple reason, that he's using his skin color and his origins as a weapon and a cudgel. And I don't think it's really fair. I keep saying, yeah, he's Muslim. He's an Arabic guy. He was born in the Netherlands and he's Egyptian. So he has as much connection to what's going on in Iraq as like I had going in World War II or something, because my family came from Italy. You know what I mean? Like that's not a connection. That's not a tether. And so I think you're right. Like it is an attention grab. And my whole thing with Rami, and I said it to him on Twitter, and he has no answer. He won't come on the show. He won't talk about it at all. It's to say, like, Rami, you have means, you have a structure around you. I know your studio doesn't exist anymore. Make it. If you think a person wants to make a game about Iraqi civilians during the 6 days in Fallujah, or the second war of Fallujah in 2004, Battle of Fallujah, I don't think anyone wants to play that game. If you think people want to play that game, make it, and we'll see. But in the meantime, I love the way you put it. It does seem like it's an attention grab. But why? Why? What is it doing to them? These people seem increasingly destitute, frankly, as far as their reach. Their various outlets are failing. Their YouTube channels, their Twitch streams. I click on some of these Twitch people sometimes when I see like person X, who's a fucking idiot, you know, says all this stuff, and then they go on Twitter or Twitch and they have 5 people, you know, and I'm like, what do you think about? It just seems like they're all talking to each other, right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's a great big circle jerk is what it is. So I think that, you know, if you don't have anything original to say and you don't actually have interesting opinions and you don't actually care to study and learn or to think critically, then your next best bet is to sort of join into the fray. Right. So I just think that we have, I mean, you saw it with Gamergate, right? With the Gamers Are Dead articles. Yes. You know, a lot of people thought that those were super coordinated, and maybe on some level they were coordinated. But my guess is that people are just followers, and they want to get the approval and the pat on the back of their sort of fellow travelers, right? So they see somebody at Polygon or Kotaku or one of these big sites, or you know, gamesindustry.biz writing a Gamers Are Dead article, and then they don't have to coordinate that. They just then write their own with their own totally unoriginal spin. There's no originality in any of those articles. I mean, the first ones, sure. You want to talk about some of those very first Gamers Are Dead articles? They were sort of very strident, very sort of combative.
The Lee
fine.
Alexander one.
Lee Alexander. Oh my God. Sometimes I just read that for fun. I just think, no, gamers aren't dead. They're just going to YouTube now, which is probably where I should have gone years ago, but oh well.
I'll say, Eric, I brought it up many times. I don't know Lee Alexander personally, but I say she holds substantial responsibility for what ended up happening by writing that article. And I've said many times,
journalism does. Yeah.
I remember, and I've said this before, it's not news to the audience, but I was at IGN when Gamergate was happening, and I was a part of the group of people that were saying internally, we should just ignore it. And because like many other things, I mean, think of all the hashtags, even to this day that happen, everything's falling apart and we're boycott, and then everything kind of falls apart. And I think that they just couldn't help themselves. And it was so strange. I wrote it down, Gamergate. That's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. Do you feel like this, because I really tried to avoid it for many reasons, right? Number one, I didn't want to be associated with it. I didn't believe in a lot of it. I know people that were hurt by it. I don't really believe it was like this movement of purity, and like, I don't think any of that's true. Right. But I will say that the legacy of it is pretty damning, because it kind of did create a delineation between people who respect the art and the medium and people who don't. And people started questioning, why is it that people that seem to hate us and the art and the games, the products, why are they telling us about them? Right. I feel like that's the greatest legacy, don't you think about? Or maybe you have a different opinion, but I feel like Gamergate's legacy is not so much the toxicity. Everyone's like, Donald Trump came out of this. I'm like, come on, man, it's so myopic. If that's ridiculous. but I do think what came out of it for our medium is much more disparaging, much more vitriolic, and you almost wish you can unwind it, because I feel like it was a little more fun back in the day. What is your take on Gamergate and its lasting ramifications?
Well, I think Gamergate, if Adam Baldwin had not said Gamergate, had not coined that phrase,
right? I forgot you did that. I forgot about that.
Yeah, it was him. He also, at the time, and I always remember this, he told me to be a happy warrior, and I've really tried to follow that advice, even though Baldwin and I are on totally opposite sides of the spectrum in terms of politics. I like that happy warrior. It's cool. Definitely. So I think, for one thing, I think if it had never been named, if it never had, I think the name gives it a power, whatever kind of power you want to bring to the table. Because I think at the time, at first, it was just the Zoe Quinn controversy, right? Right. And all these gamers getting shut down on Reddit, on 4chan, even on 4chan. That's the way 8chan was created. On all the websites, at first it was just a matter of either websites ignoring what was going on or actively clamping down on it. And then that sort of turned into this, gamers are horrible basement dwelling people that we are games journalists, but we don't need gamers in our audience, which is such a weird idea, right? It bizarre. Makes no sense. So the enduring legacy, it's so complicated, because on the one hand, at the time, I wrote a piece about how it wasn't a hate movement, it was a consumer movement. Because from the very beginning, I've written sort of a pro-consumer, I don't want to say pro-gamer, because like gamers are just people. I'm not like pro-people. People can be shitty, people can be great, whatever. Sure. But pro-consumer, because games publishing is kind of a shit show. A lot of the publishers are greedy and horrible and super opaque and whatever. So I looked at the retake Mass Effect movement and some of these other things that had happened before Gamergate. And I saw that as sort of a natural, organic outgrowth of anger and dissatisfaction in the gaming community towards not just the gaming industry, but especially the gaming press, because the gaming press have been very haughty and very arrogant. And then it just sort of intensified. And then the narrative was created that Gamergate was just a harassment campaign. Because it's so easy to paint, like if you're online and you're on Twitter, I mean, it's super easy to be like, I'm getting harassed, because people can be awful on Twitter. And especially when you have all these people that are very passionate and a lot of them are very angry. And so then pretty quickly it shifted from this idea of, what was actually happening to now you say Gamergate, and unless you're very like inside baseball, unless you were there and you were covering it as objectively as possible, you hear the word Gamergate and you think harassment campaign. But I don't think that's true. I mean, I think there was harassment going on. There was awful stuff going on. But overall, I think most people involved just wanted to talk about the problems with these people writing and covering games who didn't seem to actually like video games, didn't like the people who played video games, and just wanted to talk about like social justice issues instead of the actual games themselves. The enduring legacy, games journalism has continued to wither for the next 7 years. YouTube has become the place many gamers turn to. And if anything, in 2021, we have an even more united sort of woke social justice game journalism cabal than we did in 2014. So I don't know. I mean, I sort of wish it never had been called Gamergate, because I really feel like that gave people power to demonize everything about it rather than talk about it honestly. And I don't think there's been an honest conversation about Gamergate between the people who condemned gamers and between the people who were involved in Gamergate in 7 years, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think my passivity was really born out of fear at that time.
Sure,
because
totally.
Not only because my friends were, people that I considered friends. I mean, most of them later threw me away, but they were being attacked, and also, just kind of trying to, like you said, remain objective, see things as they are. I think one of the things that I was instructed about, Eric, in the last 7 years, the preceding 7 years, or no, the successive 7 years, is it seems like Gamergate might have been stapled with this toxicity, like you said. Yet it seems that the toxicity is just born from the internet, and that every single movement or concerted effort in any regard, in any space, as you noted, creates massive toxicity. Absolutely. I would say even worse than Gamergate, maybe because Gamergate was the lab in which it was born. I don't know. But when you look at Star Wars, for instance, right? Or you look at even what's going on with 6 Days in Fallujah, or This Land Is My Land. Certainly in politics, even if you are a somewhat uplifting or positive or affirmative candidate, like a Bernie Sanders, who's basically saying, like, we want more for you and the poor and the working class, very vitriolic online, very vitriolic fan base, right? Like, that's just reality. It's not really a reflection on Bernie Sanders. It's not a reflection on Kamala Harris or even Joe Biden, who's I'm questioning is even alive at this point, had a pretty toxic following online, right? So then you just realize that the nature of it's almost as if Gamergate has been kind of tarred and feathered, while it seems like every movement ends up like Gamergate. And I think,
absolutely.
So.
Well, I would just say that, I mean, like I write about The Walking Dead. There are so many toxic Walking Dead fans. They just don't have a handy hashtag to label them as. I mean, that's the power of language, right? That's why a lot of these people focus on language so much rather than action, is because language is sort of an easy way to demonize, to exert social power. So, if it wasn't called Gamergate, what would people call it? They would have no name for it. It would be, those angry gamers in 2014, right? Like, but yeah, I think that every fandom, I mean, the word fan is short for fanatic, right? Every fandom has toxic people. The weird thing to me is that, is how gamers have been specifically demonized by their own journalists, right? Game journalists, what is the point of demonizing your own audience like this? I mean, we know there's bad apples. We know there are asshole gamers that harass women, whatever. There are also, famous movie producers who harass women. There's doctors, there's politicians, there's, why do we focus on gamers? Because we don't actually have to address individuals. That we can just lump them in as incels or gamers or whatever.
Yeah, they're powerless.
They're powerless. Exactly. Yeah. And then we talk about harassment. Okay, well, I'm sorry. Twitter harassment does not count as real harassment. You can actually block people on Twitter really, really easily. Until they're showing up at your house or like sending you severed heads of pigs at your door. Like, it's not real harassment. It's just You're getting dogpiled, and it sucks. And I get it. It really does suck. But I don't know. I will say, I mean, to the online harassment thing, I mean, the only time in my 25 years online or whatever that I've ever felt truly threatened or truly like, was when I was concerned about that Bob Mackey guy, who was like kind of obsessing over me some years ago. And it was specifically just hundreds of tweets at me over time, including one that said, it's something along the lines of like, I will haunt you for the rest of my life or something like that. Yeah, that's pretty good.
And I was like, so that's when and I knew him in person too. So that's why I was like,
yeah.
Everything else is, I agree, kind of a little ridiculous. I know that there's that famous tweet that goes around. I think it uses like the N word, so I won't say it. But it's like, log off. There's no online bullying, like log off, And it's like this famous tweet that got retweeted like a million times back in the day. But I saw actually, Eric, and I was going to say this to you, but on Twitter, but then I didn't because I wanted to save it for our conversation. I'm so glad it came up. I noticed that you are starting to mute conversations on Twitter. Mm-hmm. And I do that. I was going to say to you, but I'll say it to you in person. I do that all the time. I mean, I mute probably half or more of what I tweet right when I tweet it. Because I'm like, I'm just going to say what I need to say. If I'll go into the comments to see, but I don't need like all this attention. And I think part of it is just, it's like looking for your own name, which I do, right? I search for my own name on Twitter. Sometimes I search for my own name on Google. You got to kind of go out of your way to see these things, and these things are going to be said anyway. And so if you kind of just limit your own exposure to it naturally, then I think it becomes easier to exist in this, in this strife-filled environment.
Well, especially with Twitter, like you can say one thing and then it can branch into 100 different conversations, right? You can't follow all those different threads. I mean, if you try to argue with someone and then resolve that, well, you might resolve it with them. But over here, where it's branched off into some other thing, it's just the nature of Twitter is bad for conversation. It's just very bad. Totally. I mean, it's very useful social media for finding out tips, for finding out news, for following trends. But when it comes to actually like productive conversation, it's a shit show. And so, I mean, and I think I get sucked in too much because I have this weird like idea that maybe just being rational and trying to talk with people can actually work. And it just doesn't actually work. Sometimes it does. I think that's what gives me hope. Sometimes I'll have someone come on and they're really mean and they're saying all this shit about me. And then I'm like, hey, look, like, let's talk. Let's just talk. And then they're like, oh, I'm sorry. And then that's nice. It's nice when that happens. But too often it's just you get. I mean, I remember Gamergate came up again like 3 years ago or something. And suddenly there were just a bunch of people, journalists and everyone talking about how horrible I was. There was somebody said I was the founder of the alt-right. Like, wow. People were blasting that. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. I need to.
You're powerful.
I'm very powerful.
Yeah. I agree with you in the sense that people that are interested in the conversation, they have to go seek it somewhere else. I think that no matter like what Twitter's tool set was, what Twitter's word count or character count was, it's just never going to become useful in that regard. No. And it's ironic because what you said is, and I agree, Twitter's utility is almost unimaginably high, right? Like I can't actually imagine a social media network being more useful and yet more destructive. I think that those are just the double edges of the sword when you create something, because like with Facebook, it's a little less anonymous, a little more personal, but you don't have that kind of heightened use of a news feed or quick searches and all that. So I totally agree with you. I think Twitter's an interesting beast, but one of the things I did want to ask you, and I brought it up earlier with Mass Effect 3, you and I had a disagreement about this, pretty staunch disagreement about.
Sure.
I tell me if I'm explaining this wrong, but my whole argument was that Mass Effect 3's ending is the creation of the artists, and that the audience has the right to interact commercially with that, but no right to ask for it to be changed. I will say, I mean, I got to ask you, Eric, wasn't I right in some way? I mean, don't you think that I was right?
I think, okay, so I do. I think it's a very difficult subject, right? I think that fans have every right to express dissatisfaction with a product, right? If they come to the end of this and they were promised all these things and then the promise didn't come true, I think fans have every right to voice their dissatisfaction. On the other hand, yes, the artist has every right to do what they do. I think what it came down to at the time, BioWare was acquired by EA after the first Mass Effect game. And I think a lot of people, probably rightfully so, saw a number of things go wrong with BioWare's output after that point. I mean, you can look at Dragon Age Origins versus Dragon Age 2 and see, I mean, some things about Dragon Age 2 were better probably, but the overall story quality and the sort of breadth and depth of the world were diminished. So I think that I think it's this is something I've always struggled with. So I think that fans, like actual consumers that love this product, I think that their voice does deserve to be heard in a way that people like Rami Ismail or these sort of critics who are criticizing something that they don't even like, that they don't even they have no intention of buying or playing. I think those are sort of, I don't think there's a hard, bright line here, but I do think that there's a difference, right? Between fans who have played the first two games, who love this series and are disappointed with the ending, saying, you promised us something and then you didn't deliver and we're pissed off, versus people who are saying, this game is harmful and dangerous and should be canceled, right? So I think there is a difference between those two groups. One that is actively involved in that game's existence, and one that just wants to shut it down. My problem with the Mass Effect days, first of all, I heard that, I was just starting writing about video games at the time. So I came into this and I was reading all these things that all these gamers are mad about, the gay romances and stuff. So I'm like, wow, that's terrible how these gamers are so homophobic. But then when I started talking to actual gamers, they were like, this is a red herring. We're not mad about this stuff. Maybe a couple losers are mad about this. We're mad about the story. We're mad about these things that we were promised. But everyone just keeps saying we're homophobic. Everyone keeps saying we're entitled. Everyone keeps describing us as these, basically subhuman whiners who just are mad about everything. And that made me really think, like, wait, is the narrative that the press is pushing different from the reality down on the ground where the consumers are? And so, you know what? It's fine to say, and I totally agree, the artist has every right to create whatever they want to. But I mean, it's also a commercial endeavor. The consumer has every right to not be happy with it.
Sure. I think that's something that I mean, in kind of looking back and recollecting, I think that was the one thing that I really did. I think I did a lot wrong in that piece and in that video. And as I've said, the video was supposed to also be much more comedic than it was cut into and all of that. But the buck stops with me. Well, I feel
we all
like
make mistakes.
Right, exactly. And so I just think it's ironic that at that inflection point for myself comes this nugget, as it were, that still rings true today, that we're talking about, that we can connect to the intent of the artists. They're not EA and BioWare, they're, Highwire and whatever. Sure. And they're just a much smaller dev. Although I really love the point that you made about EA and BioWare and kind of BioWare falling off. And what's even funnier than that, Eric, to me, is that, like, who even cares about BioWare anymore? That's right. It's so much has changed where it's like, I don't care about, but that was literally the last game I cared about.
Yeah, they are not the same studio anymore, right? I mean, and that's, you look at these giant publishers. I mean, that's why I feel like taking a pro-consumer stance is always the right move, because these giant publishers, I mean, they really don't care about video games for the most part. They care about money. Sure. And that's fine. You got to make money, right? I like to make money too. But when, I think you can see EA actually making good, positive changes since then to focus more on what gamers actually do want to play, and focus more on supporting small studios, making games that are different from, back in the day when they acquired BioWare, right, they were all about just the sports games and the big shooters. And I remember talking with people involved in some of that, just saying, when they acquired BioWare, they treated BioWare like one of their sports studios. They had to make the game. They had to get it out on time. It didn't matter. If they couldn't get out on time, they would have to cut. They'd have to cut content, take shortcuts, whatever. And I don't think EA is the same company they were then today. And I think that's directly because of consumer pressure. You can look at loot boxes with this, Star Wars, and just I think pro-consumer pressure on these publishers is super important. And that's why I find this whole the thrust of games journalism being all about sort of social justice and wokeness so puzzling, because it just seems like the wrong place to put pressure and the wrong type of coverage to have for video games.
Yeah, I also will say, you brought up a really salient point, I think, which is the idea of kind of gaming is supposed to be this, at least to me, in my interpretation, it's a place where we go to escape, to be someone else, to be something else, to be somewhere else. And so it should be the at least in my opinion, it should be the medium that is maybe least dependent on who you are, where you come from, what you believe, because we're all kind of here to not be ourselves. We're not reading a nonfiction book about World War II and gleaning that knowledge to make ourselves a better person. We're trying often to be somewhere else. A lot of people get away from the bad things in their life and all of that. You'd think in a very class-like way that it would be a classist thing to say, we are one because we're the escapists, we're the artists, we're the curious people and all of that. Don't you think that? See, that's what's so disappointing about it is a small group of people that don't. I would love to see some of these people's trophies and achievements, just because in that, I'm not trying to be a dickhead, and I know some people don't care, but it'll tell you what you played at least. And I am of the mind that these people don't play games. And I remember in the pre-trophy and achievement period when people were getting nailed by MMO developers for not playing the game fully when they would review it and all that. That stuff doesn't happen anymore because there's a way to see. And it would just be nice if we all said, like, you know what, it doesn't matter if we're a Democrat or a Republican. You and I are not going to vote for the same people in 2022 and 2024. It doesn't matter. I mean,
nope.
I just feel like there should be more collective. Like, we're a mainstream thing now. This comes up all the time now, right? I always talk about really pivotal nerd culture moments, Lord of the Rings movies, the Star Wars prequels, Game of Thrones, where everything, Westworld, where things become more mainstream. And so we should have less to fight about than ever. We should have more to share. And so that's what's really bothersome to me about it. And yet I just don't know how else to affect change in a positive way, because everything seems to be reduced. Like, as a straight white male, I didn't do anything to anyone. But as a straight white male, I'm my opinions are relevant. I'm a bad guy. My people did something in the past. But this is what's so stupid about reducing people to their color and to their. My family didn't own any slaves. I mean, honestly, it doesn't matter, because you shouldn't be putting sins of the father on the son anyway. Otherwise, why would we deal with Germany? Why would we deal with Italy? Why would we deal with Japan? And yet I just feel like it doesn't matter. It just feels like people want to argue and fight, belittle, and sever each other away from each other. And that's what makes me sad the most, Eric, is that I think I found my only true social calling in my entire life with other people that play games. And it's almost feeling like it's being robbed from me. How do you feel about the way the games culture is right now? Let's remove media. I mean, how much is media toxifying or not the culture of games?
I would say it is toxifying. So I would say that it's what's really sort of ironic about games like D&D or video games. This is that I think that there was always actually, that people always describe it as like this used to only be the realm of men or boys, right? But realistically, like, that's not really true. It was only that way because girls didn't want to play D&D back in the day as much as boys did. But as soon as girls did want to play, boys were all about that. We were very, very excited to play with girls. It just wasn't a very common thing.
Definitely. That's my experience in the 90s was desperate to get some girl to play,
Absolutely. I feel like guys are still kind of like that a lot of the time. It's like, you want to play D&D, and the girls are just not as interested. But there's not this gatekeeping that people say there is. There's this idea that gamers want to chase women out of gaming, and I think that's so ludicrous. It's almost hilarious. We are always trying to get our women to play games with us. Like, we want, and if you look back, like, sure, okay, you look at art from like old D&D books or old comic books. It's like the chicks always have like skimpy clothes and big tits and whatever, but the guys also have skimpy clothes and big old muscles, right?
Yeah, like barbarian or something.
Exactly. Look at Conan, any sort of old Conan art. Yeah, the men and women are both hypersexualized. It's designed for a bunch of horny, 15 to 25-year-olds or 50-year-olds or whatever. I mean, culture in general is hypersexualized. That's just the fact. It's men and women both. This whole idea of the male gaze, I find extremely funny, because I'm sorry, like, look at like action movie stars and like Jason Momoa and all these guys. No, it's men and women.
Right.
So I
gaze,
think, like,
period.
Yeah, like, exactly. So I think this idea that, I think that actually the fantasy genre, D&D, video games have always been very open and welcoming. And I read these things about how there are not enough like badass women warriors. I'm sorry, like, go back a few decades. There's tons of them. I mean, maybe there's more men, but I mean, you can go watch Xena, Warrior Princess.
Yeah, I love Xena.
Red Sonja, like tons of, and yeah, sure, okay, they're hot, but like, so what? So are the dudes. They're all hot. I mean, that people like to watch pretty, beautiful people with swords. Whatever. This idea that it's been gated off. This idea that we have to fight for more inclusivity. It's bullshit. It's 9 times out of 10 bullshit. Yeah, okay, for sure, there's some of that is true. Like, but that's not just in geek culture. That's in culture. Like, you go back and watch some old Nickelodeon shows from the 90s. Most of the kids on those shows are white, right? There were not as many Black or Asian or Native or Latino kids on those shows. Okay, well, I mean, part of that is just the natural result of there being more white people in general than that's why they're minorities, right? But it's not. It's weird to me that, like, once again, it's geek culture, it's nerd culture being targeted as this place of like, gatekeeping and intolerance. Which, when in my experience, growing up in a couple different countries, growing up with adopted siblings from Korea, growing up with, in general, growing up with friends who were nerds and who were picked on, this was not an intolerant community. And it's weird that now all these people who seem like outsiders, who seem like people who came from not the same nerd or geek culture, have come in and said, we need to make this more inclusive. And we're going to shit on everybody that is part of this community so that we can not necessarily bring in more inclusive, like more types of people, but just their particular brand of politics. And it feels like bullying to me.
I totally agree. And I think that it's so strange because what you're saying resonates with me in the sense that all the gamers I knew just wanted to play and just wanted to be a part of something and have their own community. And I'm not one of these guys that's like, gatekeeping's good, actually, and all that. Well, I think it's an interesting argument. It's not something I really think is fruitful to our particular vertical of entertainment, but I feel like it is okay to say, like, we are here for a certain reason. You're belittling us. You are taking away our love and joy of something and calling us something we're not. And it's very sad. It goes back to what you were saying about Twitter's lack of use in the sense that, like, well, when you're called a racist or you're called a bigot or a sexist, saying I'm not racist is apparently not a defense, right? So you're not able to do anything about it except for to retreat further. And I think this is what creates polarization. So I'm concerned about it, and I'm going to be keeping a close eye on it. That's why I'm so happy to have my own totally separate community of people because they're down. They're not like, a lot of them are not like me politically. They're just so sick of everything that they just want someone to talk to them like an adult and someone outside of the ecosystem where, like you said, it's a circle jerk, and I don't need any of them. Right. Like, totally. The musical chair circle jerk that's happening on right now as all these sites slowly fail. I don't need them. You know, so it's a beautiful situation for me to be into. And yet I feel bad for everyone that's left behind. The one last thing I wanted to ask you about, Eric, this one last kind of topic, and there's a few pieces to it. I'm kind of curious. Did you read or hear what John Garvin said, the old Sony Bend director and writer, to David Jaffe? Did you follow any of this at all, by chance?
I just sort of, I think I saw some of it, but I didn't really dig into it yet. No. Okay,
so I'll just tell you, because I'm kind of curious what you think of this. His whole thing is, well, here's a, and this comes from Video Game Chronicle, but here's a paragraph or a little sentence of what he says in part to Jaffe. And people should know it. I know both of these people personally, so take what you will. He says, I do have an opinion on something that your audience may find of interest, and it might piss some of them off. If you love a game, buy it at fucking full price. I can't tell you how many times I've seen gamers say, yeah, I got that on sale, or I got it through PS Plus, whatever. Now, Jaffe asks, how do you know if you love a game before you played it? And then Garvin says, I'm not saying you don't, but you complain if a game doesn't get a sequel if it wasn't supported at launch. It's like God of War got whatever millions of sales at launch, and you know Days Gone didn't. I'm just speaking for me personally as a developer. I don't work for Sony. I don't know what the numbers are. I can tell you that when we were doing Siphon Filter Dark Mirror on PSP, we got so fucked on Dark Mirror because piracy was a thing, and Sony wasn't really caught up on what piracy was doing to sales. And we would show them torrents. A torrent site had 200,000 copies of Dark Mirror being downloaded. If I remember it right, the numbers could be wrong, but regardless, I was pissed about it then, and I was like, this is money out of my pocket. So I think the uptick in engagement with the game is not as important as did you buy the game at full price? Because if you did, then that's supporting the developers directly. End quote. What do you? I'm really interested. Maybe you have to think about it, and you're not going to have like a totally sufficient answer. But John Garvin's basically nailing the audience for saying, like, well, you liked Days Gone, you didn't like it enough because you guys let it linger and got it on PS Plus and waited for it to be $10, and so you will get no sequel. And he's not at the studio anymore, obviously, as well. But
or he neither Jeff Ross.
Yeah, Jeff Ross too. I mean, he was the director of the game, has also kind of said similar stuff. But what do you think of that? Because I think I probably have a pretty unpopular opinion on this too, but I'm interested in yours first, which is to say, do gamers have some sort of financial obligation to the industry, or should they always, as a consumer, be seeking the cheapest and lowest price or more affordable, accessible solution. Because it's interesting, like when I go to the supermarket, I'm not like trying to spend more money. There are certain brands I buy and I like, but I'm looking for the best deal. And in the when I go to the movies, I try to not see it at night, so at least I can save a few bucks, right? Well, why would gaming be any different? I can't really reconcile it. I'm wondering what you think of, just as at the top, what you might think of Mr. Garvin's comment.
Well, I think that I think that businesses have clear strategies when it comes to pricing, right? So a new high-end gizmo or gadget is released. The business who releases it, that releases it, they sell it for a lot more than they're going to sell it down the road, right? They are counting on their super fans, their early adopters, to spend more. But they understand that after a little while, they're going to have to lower the price so that they can get that next tier of consumers, and then lower the price again until the cycle turns and a new product comes out and it repeats itself. It's the same with video games, except for some very exclusive video games like Nintendo and Activision. Pretty much those games they release at $60 or now $70, and then they also offer up collector's editions and super duper collector's editions and all this other stuff. And then over the course of time they lower the price, because businesses understand that you can only nab so many customers at full price. Then you can nab some more at a lower price, and then we've seen a whole revolution of free to play games that you don't pay for at all, and they make all their money off of microtransactions or battle passes and so forth. So I think that those comments are pretty much total bullshit, honestly, because the fact is, you're going to have your super fans, you're going to have your but with a new IP like Days Gone, you don't have fans. You don't have like a baked in audience that's super excited for Uncharted 4. You don't have a baked in audience for any of that. Now, it sucks if people don't buy it at full price. I get that. Like, that sucks for the developer and they want a sequel, but the sequel is up to Sony and the faith that Sony has in that IP and in that developer. It's not up to consumers. Consumers, it sucked that people didn't buy Titanfall 2, right? I thought Titanfall 2 was a magnificent game. I loved that game. The campaign was awesome. The multiplayer was super cool. I think that, why didn't people buy it? Well, maybe because EA released it in between some other major video games like Battlefield and Call of Duty, and maybe they should have waited till February. Okay, that's not consumers' fault. They didn't market that game well. And Days Gone, it's the same story. That game released, it had some marketing, but it was an unknown IP. It was buggy as all get out. It didn't get like rave reviews, and it didn't have a lot of hype. So is it the consumer's fault for not buying that? No, I don't think so. I think if Sony had marketed it better, if they had maybe put a little more time and polish into it, but even with all of those factors, you can't always strike gold. Like Dark Souls, that's a great example of a fairly new phenomenon, but it really audiences really connected with it in a way that was sort of revolutionary. But that is just not going to happen every time. So no, I don't think that you hope that your super fans come and buy the game at full price, and they probably will. Look at Cyberpunk 2077. That was a buggy, ridiculous launch, right? But people bought it by the millions because they had faith in CD Projekt Red. And it was a new IP, not a new IP, but a new video game IP. But they were coasting on the success of the Witcher series. So Days Gone, it sucks that it might not get a sequel, but that's something that Sony has to, that they're ultimately responsible for, not consumers.
I feel like I think you're largely right. I think my only disagreement is that I think video game players are a little coddled when it comes to when it comes to, how do I put this? When it comes to the ramifications of their decisions, right? Nothing in this industry, like in any other industry, happens in a vacuum. I don't blame people for gravitating to a $1 a month subscription on Gamepass, for instance. Why wouldn't you? I mean, why wouldn't you do that? And why wouldn't you load up as much as you can on that cheap subscription model? And why would you buy Days Gone when you can get it on PS Plus? And you're right. Sony made a bunch of decisions that really hurt Bend, including, as I said at the very time, this was, I don't deal with Sony at all anymore. Days Gone was the last game that I actually dealt with them on, and I told them, and I think part of the reason why I think they don't want to deal with me for a lot of reasons, but I sent them an email and said, I think you guys pretty much screwed Bend on this game, because you let the reviews go out without there being a patch. The game is broken. You guys have to know the game is broken, and this happens often. Like, we get 1.0 versions and we're asked to wait, and you didn't. It almost felt like they were sending it out to die. And I don't think they were necessarily doing that, but the game obviously wasn't greenlit for a sequel, as according to Jeff Ross, we're not going to get one. They're working on a new IP, which is great. But my only thing is that I wonder if audiences are just too inoculated from the ultimate cause of why certain things happen in the industry based on money, and how you kind of sometimes, I really believe, have to put your money where your mouth is. I do. Like, I do pretty well for myself. I understand a lot of people out there are struggling, so I don't want to make it seem like I'm not aware of that. We talk about that on the show a lot, but I can afford to buy any game I want, and I try to buy games new, just even if I'm not going to play them right away, just to let just to, like the new Vanillaware game, right? I just bought that, and I was like, oh, I'll get to it eventually, but I want to support them. And so I feel like Game Pass is going to be this thing that's going to end up, I know a lot of people are really into it right now, but I feel like it's going to be the thing that ends up really hurting console gaming. I know Sony is trying to do the same thing, but I don't know how, or they're going to have to, but I just don't know how the finances work. They don't work. Well, I'm so sick of people saying Game Pass is profitable. There's no way. They're probably losing hundreds of millions of dollars a quarter on Game Pass. I'm sorry to interrupt, though. What were you going to say?
No. So I think Game Pass, just like the Epic Game Store, where, Epic has poured a bunch of money into this to give out free games and buy exclusives and whatnot. I think it's just a shift of where the money is coming from. The money is still there. Microsoft is a massive, massive corporation. If they want to spend their money to support games and have gamers just pay a subscription fee, that's not, the money's not like disappearing. It's still there. It's just coming more from Microsoft than from gamers. Epic Games, they wanted to create a store that could compete with Steam. They spent a lot of money. They're going to lose a lot of money. Eventually, I do think they'll be profitable. But I mean, the video, I mean, I don't know the current figures off the top of my head, but the video game industry has a ton. It makes a lot of money. I think part of the problem is that a lot of these games cost a lot of money to make. And that's, again, not the game. That's not the consumer's fault. It's not their fault that a game like Days Gone costs millions and millions and millions of dollars to produce and then doesn't really hit those sales figures. It's just not their fault. Sure, piracy. I don't personally approve of piracy. Like, I won't pirate games, but the industry has to adjust. And what we've seen is a move towards free to play, towards battle pass systems. Like Call of Duty has a battle pass now. I mean, towards multiplayer and so on and so forth. I think that you really can't lay blame at the feet of consumers, because consumers aren't individuals. It's just it's the market. The market's going to do what the market's going to do, right? You can say, oh, gamers are bad for pirating, or gamers are bad for not buying new, but like, you can't control the crowd. The crowd's the crowd. All you can do is from the business standpoint, is decide, is $500 million too much to spend on this video game? Do we need to market this new IP more? How are we going to sell this game? You can't really, you can't come to the market and bring a product and then get mad when people don't buy it right away. Because maybe you're not selling it. Maybe you're not making the sale, and you can't get mad at the customer for not buying something when you're not making the sale. So that, and sure. I mean, if you want to like say, game, like this whole propensity to pirate, but that could be the music business. That could be the TV business. I mean, back in the day before Netflix, people were pirating TV shows, and then the business, the supply side adjusted and came out with Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu. And suddenly, like, the incentive to pirate went down considerably, because it's so easy to just pay a few bucks a month and watch your shows on Netflix. So I think that, while we can say that there's some entitlement or there's some responsibility on the consumer side to support something that they love, which I do agree with, I think that on the other side of the aisle is where, the important decisions are made. The decisions that can be made, because consumers are just millions of people making their own individual choices. You can't control that,
Right.
So
well, yeah, the market must coerce them. And I
Exactly.
totally agree. I totally agree with you on that. My one pushback on it, though, in this particular situation, and I'm a PlayStation fan, but I should note I'm a Microsoft shareholder, so I guess you have to balance those two things a little bit, is when Microsoft went out and bought Bethesda, right, for $7.5 billion, they vastly overpaid, by the way. There's no way that company was worth that much or those IP were worth that much. They were able to go do that. And then when you saw the financials, which I did because I pay attention to that stuff, you saw that they made in profit Microsoft as a whole, all of that money back. Yeah. And I get concerned just because the other notable entrants like Nintendo and Sony that kind of combat Microsoft don't have the amount of money they do. So especially Sony and Nintendo, I mean, both of those companies, their marquee products are PlayStation and and Switch, right? As opposed to Microsoft, where they really don't care about Xbox at all. Right. They don't. I mean, I listen to the calls sometimes and like look at the financials. They do not care about Xbox. Nope. They don't make them any money. And so it's I'm concerned. Vanity project. Yeah, it's exactly right. And we knew that from the very beginning when Bill Gates tried to buy Nintendo. Microsoft tried to buy Nintendo in the 90s. So it was always a way for them to kind of bully their way in. And I have no problem with that. I think Xbox has a great legacy now, great online, good studios, really good thing going on. I'm not saying any of that. But what I'm concerned about is when a company can change the economics of the other two companies' market to the point where we just heard Sean Layden and other people say not too long ago, and Jim Ryan's echoed it, that like their games are too expensive to make and we need to make shorter games that are cheaper and we can turn them around quicker. But then you have a studio that's or Microsoft that's like, well, you know what? You can just have this subscription for $1 a month. We're going to pay hundreds of millions of dollars a quarter to the developers. Our competitors cannot do it. And eventually it's going to strip down to the bare essentials. It's what Apple did. Before Google started fighting them on Android, but the race to the bottom brought all games to the bottom. And before you remember, I mean, in 2007 and 2008, people had no problem buying a $20 iPhone game. But come 2009 or 2010, you couldn't get people paying for anything. And that's what I'm afraid is going to end up happening. Everyone's really excited about Game Pass on the development side now because they put out a game. Microsoft cuts them a $5 million check and they don't have to worry. But that's not going to happen forever. And so that's my major concern. I'm just really interested to fast forward and see how this all goes. And I'm also interested, Eric, to see if Sony can finally create PS Now or make PS Now into something that will actually compete. And they're starting to kind of do it. Borderlands and Marvel Avengers is on there. Those are probably the biggest games they've ever gotten. But we'll see. I do want to ask you this one last thing, though, before we go, because I've kept you long enough. But I want to ask, we've been talking about PlayStation and Xbox. How are you feeling right now? I mean, what do you feel about the two companies are approaching things very differently? I argue that there's no reason to have a PS5, yet PS5 is the best-selling console in American history so far, up to 5 months, and has this inertial move where it just seems like it's going to do fine anyway. Right. Microsoft seems to be making much more cogent moves, and I look at Microsoft and say 30-plus teams, if you can get those 30-plus teams firing in a coherent way, you're going to bury PlayStation. There's just no way it's going to happen any other way. I don't know if they can do it, though. How are you feeling about everything right now?
Well, I mean, I think Microsoft made so many mistakes for so long, and that in the last few years, they've just step by step turned every single thing around. I mean, if you go back to like 2013 when the PS4 and Xbox One were coming out, it was such a different. I mean, PlayStation had positioned itself as sort of the gamers console. Xbox was this, you have to be online all the time. And, it was, and you fast forward to now, Xbox is much more open. Microsoft is being much more open with gamers. I think Game Pass is pretty brilliant. Personally, I don't use it. I have a subscription because Game Pass Ultimate, of course, is like $15 a month, but it includes PC and it includes Xbox Live Gold. So it's a great deal. But I mean, it's too many games for me to play. I already have too many games to play. But I think that, just way too many all the time. I think Microsoft is making so many great choices. I think their console is a lot more boring, but I think the boringness of it is great. It's a lot less buggy than the PlayStation 5. I still think that Sony is making the best video games, though. I mean,
definitely.
Demon Souls, the remake of Demon Souls is phenomenal. There haven't been a ton. I mean, like with every new console generation, there are not nearly enough exclusives at the beginning to justify purchasing. I have a PlayStation 5. I have an Xbox Series X. Would I recommend them to people right now? I think you can wait. Don't spend extra money on them.
I agree.
Like there's not that much going on. In terms of long-term strategies, I think that Sony needs to definitely stop just focusing on AAA marquee titles like Uncharted or The Last of Us, and make more smaller. And there are some sort of smaller, more independent games coming out. But Microsoft has just been on such an acquisition spree that you can just see a year or two from now, there are going to be a lot of Microsoft exclusives.
Definitely.
Probably more than Sony. On the other hand, a lot of those will be available. All of those will be available on PC. So that throws a little wrench into everything.
Right. And this also creates, Eric, the situation I'm saying where are they going to make money on any of this? And does Microsoft care? Mm-hmm. I mean, is Microsoft engaged right now to kill PlayStation? It seems that way.
That's worrisome for sure.
And I just look at, Sony doesn't even have enough cash on hand. If Let's say Sony wanted to buy Bethesda, right? They didn't even have enough cash on hand to buy it. So they would have had to offer stock options or take out loans and stuff. I mean, that's the kind of disparate economics these two companies are dealing with, even though they're both multinational mega conglomerates. And I worry about that. And I worry about corporate consolidation. I worry about foreign money, especially from China. And I worry about an almost monopolization of certain aspects of gaming happening by a bigger, more burly competitor. It's very similar to what happened with Amazon in the retail space, where they're just so much bigger. You can't compete. There's nothing you can do.
It's the only thing I would say is that Sony has been, despite all of these odds against them, competing for years.
Definitely.
So even though Sony has, for inexplicable reasons, blacklisted me, I'm going to give them some benefit of the doubt in that they have created so many very beloved IPs, best-selling games, franchises that have staying power. And Microsoft has done a couple, but Microsoft's their track record with exclusives has not been nearly the same caliber as Sony's. No. Nintendo is a tiny little company compared to Microsoft. I mean, they do have quite a lot of cash on hand, but they have managed to weather the storm of everyone saying they should get out of the console business entirely and just make Nintendo games for every console. And they're still producing best-selling games that sell crazy amounts and consoles that they are making money off of. I have a little faith, I guess, but I am, just like you said, I am worried about the monopolization. I don't love the idea of acquisitions as opposed to just paying a studio for an exclusive. It's one thing, like let's look at Platinum Games, right? They have made exclusives from various consoles. And I just think, ultimately I feel a lot more comfortable with Microsoft paying for an exclusive from Platinum, or Nintendo paying for an exclusive from Platinum, rather than Microsoft buying Platinum Games and now they're only on Xbox and PC. So yeah, I totally agree. I do fear that.
I totally agree. And that comes back to the fear of saying well, they can. I mean, at some point, I own a small developer, right? No one wants us, but if someone gave us enough money, we would sell in 2 seconds. And when you're dealing with if someone just gave you life altering generational wealth, I wouldn't give a shit. I mean, so I don't blame these other people. So that's what I fear a little bit, but there's a lot to deal with, and we'll have to follow this. I'll have you back soon, and we can follow up on some of this stuff, Eric. But I appreciate you taking I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today, and remind the audience where they can find you if you want them to harass you a little bit, in good ways, harass in good ways.
Yes, or bad ways. I'll take it. I'll take it either way. I can deal. I'm on Substack. My Substack is called Diabolical, so you can just diabolical.substack.com, or I'm at Forbes, forbes.com/site/Erik Kain. So I cover video games at Forbes, and I cover all the bullshit at my Substack. So
nice. Yeah, go check those things out. And again, I know the audience is still acclimating to what Substack is, but I really feel like the future of written content, very similar to what Patreon did for podcasting and YouTubing, Twitch streaming, whatever. I feel like Substack is that for writing, and I'm just so familiar with it because of it's very political there. But I was so happy when I saw you were doing something there, because I'm like, this is good. We need proving grounds that lots of different stuff can work over there. So go support Erik on Substack if you can. And otherwise, thank you all so much for your love, kindness, and support of Sacred Symbols and all things Last Stand Media. We'll see you next time for more Sacred Symbols Plus, and of course on the regular show as well. Thank you again. Goodbye. Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and Burbank, California, USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Chris Raygun Maldonado. Sacred Symbol's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.